Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are now at the last session of this long day. And first of all, I want to say thank you for all your attention. And it has been a huge, successful conference that we are now embarking on the last session. This particular panel is called the Dalai Lama, Reincarnation, Succession, and the Geopolitics. Really, I think there was a little bit of a touch at the first session, the last session that we had. But I thought just to give a background to our experts' opinion, I want to introduce this session with a short introduction by saying, or by really putting forward to you some few quotes that are very relevant to what we are going to discuss. And the first is the affirmation of His Holiness Dalai Lama on this 2nd of July this year, when His Holiness declared that I am affirming that the institution of the Dalai Lama will continue. Furthermore, his statement reiterated that the Kanzen Phorang Trust has sole authority to recognize the future reincarnation. No one else has any such authority to interfere in this matter. His Holiness further gives a process direction, and I quote, the Kanzen Phorang trustees, should consult the various heads of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions and the reliable oath-bound Dharma protectors who are linked inseparably to the lineage of the Dalai Lama. They should accordingly carry out the procedures of search and the recognition in accordance with past traditions. His Holiness has made it very clear in his latest autobiography, the book, The Voice for the Voiceless, I quote, that the future Dalai Lama will be born in a free country. There are so many questions in here. It is no surprising that on the 25th of July, 2025, the Chinese Foreign Ministry declared that next Dalai Lama must be a reincarnation born within China, approved by China or Beijing, according to national laws and historical precedents. So this is the background under which we are going to discuss this. I think the battle for the soul of Tibet and the survival of Tibetan Buddhism and its unique intricacies, which has been developed and refined over 1,300 years, started when the Chinese Communist Party invaded Tibet in 1951. Many decades of deliberate destructions of monasteries and nunneries, burning of priceless scriptures, disrobing of monks and nuns, destruction of learning and cultural centers of Tibet took place. They considered, the Chinese considered, the core value of Tibetan Buddhism and the spiritual leaders such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Panchen Lama and many other spiritual leaders as enemies of the Chinese state. Since the 1st of September 2007, as a means of controlling the influence of reincarnate spiritual masters of Tibet, the so-called Order Number 5 was issued by the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party and the State Council, officially named as the measures of the management of the reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. This order requires a compulsory registration of all individuals seeking to be recognized as reincarnate spiritual leaders with the Chinese Communist authorities. Amongst many of the clauses in this order is the most telling is this, and which is targeted against the Tibetan administration in exile. I quote, "The reincarnating living Buddha shall not be interfered with or under the dominion of any foreign organizations and individuals." This reflects the principle of this order. This is the crux of what the Chinese authorities are trying to achieve, because they know that His Holiness Dalai Lama and all the religious heads of the Tibetan Buddhism are in exile at the moment. This really atheist Chinese government wants to institute a new system whereby all the heads are denied the right of offering guidance and ultimately a say in matters relating to the spiritual and religious freedom, recognizing tulkus in their own school. It completely really jeopardizes the unique traditional system of recognizing tulkus and will lead to direct political control of the tulkus to suit the needs of the Chinese Communist Party. Political control over the religious activities and the role of religion by attempting to make key religious figures and pension lamas like other tulkus into a paid bureaucracy of the Chinese government is a new weapon deployed to undermine the Tibetan Buddhism and to insult and oppress the Tibetan people. So, to discuss this vast subject, I would like to invite our first speaker. He has been very vocal and energetic in bringing the issue of reincarnation and succession at the forefront of discussion everywhere he goes. He believes very strongly that the reincarnation and the succession of tulkus are indigenous and organically developed in Tibet, and Tibetans must prepare and be ready to challenge and win the narration or narrative in the battle of geopolitics of reincarnation and succession of the Dalai Lama against China. So your speaker is Dr. Lobsang Sengye.
Good afternoon. I've been traveling a bit, so I would rather stand and try to beat my jet lag so that I don't fall asleep. From the very morning, I've been observing two of our fantastic organizers, Sonam Fasila and Devesh Anandla, planned this very well. They rushed all the first three panels to finish on time, so we have all the time in the world. So I asked them, what's our time limit? They said, there is no time limit now. We have the whole panel, and dinner starts only at 7, so is it 4:15? Yeah, to 7 we can go on. So that's why I also decided to stand so that I'm away from the moderator, so I can pretend not to see whenever he waves 5 minutes or 7 minutes, anything like that. Yeah. So thank you for hosting the event. And what I'll try to do is, look at the topic. It's geopolitics, succession, reincarnation. I'll try to talk in reverse way, okay? Because we have two fantastic speakers, and I was telepathically trying to guess what they might speak. But then I was very tempted after Sonam Fasila, explained the topic. I thought perhaps geopolitics, we must address this, because some might think that Tibet is such a small country. It is not. If Tibet was an independent country, it's almost like 12 or the 13th largest territory in the world, right? Hence the interest. Why geopolitics? So if, like Martin says, Chinese government, of course, is a communist party. There's a religion is poison. They don't believe, it's an atheist regime. They don't believe in religion, and they are not interested in reincarnation. They don't believe in reincarnation. For us, reincarnation is the individual. For Chinese government, their interest is not reincarnation, but the office. Right? They don't care who that person is. They can change. but they care the office. Why the office? Because His Holiness the Dalai Lama's influence ranges from Ladakh to Himachal to Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, all the way to Arunachal Pradesh. Whole of Himalayan belt, most sensitive area between India and China presently. If you control the office of Dalai Lama, you can influence the Himalayan region to lean more towards China than towards Tibetans or India. Now up north is Tibet. You control the office of Dalai Lama, you can control Tibet. And what is Tibet? Tibet is very rich in water, right? 6 of the 10 largest rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. 136 different kinds of minerals. 75% of uranium, the lithium reserve of China is in Tibet. So that's why they want to control minerals. They want to control water. That's why Tibet. And up north is Inner Mongolia. Also majority Buddhists, and they follow Dalai Lama as their teacher. They want to have control or influence over Mongolia, or rather continue to sustain their influence over Mongolia. Why? 90% of the rare earth of China is in Inner Mongolia. Now, rare earth is weaponized by Chinese government. They are pressuring whole Western world. America also, it's quite weak on this, because without rare earth, you cannot have phones, satellites, missiles, any technology now. But 90% of the rare earth is in Inner Mongolia. So when China is weaponizing globally about rare earth, it's Inner Mongolian rare earth. Now you have the office of Dalai Lama, you can influence Inner Mongolia. Up north, independent Mongolia. Again, they follow Dalai Lama as their religious leader. So again, look at the landmass from Himalayan region to Tibet to Inner Mongol, Outer Mongolia. Up north of Mongolia, Buret, Tuba, and Kalmyk, 3 republics of Russia, are also Buddhist. They also follow Dalai Lama. Can you imagine the influence of the office of Dalai Lama? That's why they want to control the office of Dalai Lama. Now, Buret, Kalmyk, and Tuba, again, rich in natural resources as well, but now it's connected to, can you imagine reincarnation of Dalai Lama is connected to Ukraine war? Because Russia is dependent on China now, 90% of the drones of Russia are supplied one way or the other by China. But you might not know, 40% of the drone parts of Ukraine are also supplied by China. Why? They want to prolong the war. You prolong the war in Ukraine, that means you drain Europe, including UK, it's coalition of the willing, and there's war fatigue, and you exhaust all your resources. And more Russia prolongs its war, Russia also drains its economy, it weakens itself, and it becomes from junior to junior most partner of China. Right? Now, they're killing 5 birds with 1 stone. Ukraine, Russia, Europe, and America. If there is an invasion of Taiwan, some say it is going to happen, but some say 2027, anytime, Europe and NATO will not be in position to support, because they say we are so exhausted with Ukraine war. We don't want to touch Taiwan. And America, with 28 countries in Europe, is not able to defeat Russia. In Asia, how many countries will support America? 4 or 5 at most. Now, because of Russia's dependency on China, China is pressuring all these 3 republics in Russia to support China and go against Dalai Lama. That's why His Holiness Dalai Lama has not been able to visit Russia for the last 10 years. Recently, there was an international conference just a few weeks ago in Kalmyk, International Buddhist Conference. Delegations from all the Buddhist countries participated. And India also had a delegation, which included 3 Indian citizens with Indian passport, but from Tibetan monasteries of Tibetan origin. But China pressured Russia to deny them visa. Now India buys 70% of the arms from Russia, oil from Russia. India has been a great friend of Russia, but now Russia had to choose between Indian pressure or Chinese pressure, right? Who did they choose? They chose China, and visas were denied to 3 Tibetan lamas. That's why we want this war to end. Because if war continues, more Russia becomes dependent on China. China will say 3 republics should choose their Dalai Lama and not our Dalai Lama, right? So geopolitically is very important. Now I want to address 3 things because we don't have Chinese representation. I'll try to make their point of view and then counter it from Tibetan perspective. Number 1, the Chinese government says, as the statement was read, we decree and decide the next Dalai Lama because we have the authority. Whoever we select or decree will be the 15th Dalai Lama, and Dalai Lama himself have no role, no right to decide. That's their claim. And we will use golden urn to select that is more authentic than whatever traditional process the Tibetans will use. And third, we have laws. 1995 regulation, 2007 order number 5. So we have all this in place. That's why we have more right to decide or select the next Dalai Lama, not the Dalai Lama and Tibetan people. Now let's go one by one. Chinese government claims they have, when an emperor decrees, followers follow. Now we have to go back to 5th Dalai Lama. 5th Dalai Lama dies, Desi Sangye Gyatso hides, in the previous panel it was shared, hide the fact that the 5th Dalai Lama died for more than 14 years. Number 1, if Tibet was part of China, directly under control of China, how can anyone can hide someone's death for 14 years and Beijing or Chinese government not know about it? The fact that Beijing or Chinese emperor was so far away that no clue what was happening in Tibet was clear that one could hide for 14 years. First of all, I'm making this Chinese point of view, from Chinese perspective. Okay, Manchu is a foreign ruler over China, which is a separate matter. Now what happens is, after 14 years, the Qing came to know that, oh, 5th Dalai Lama has died. Desi Sangye Gyatso, why did you hide this? You're wrong. What the hell did you do? But Desi Sangye Gyatso said, yes, I want to complete the construction of Potala Palace, so I hide this, but this is the authentic Dalai Lama from Arunachal Pradesh. And the Qing said, okay, I decree that he is the reincarnation of 5th Dalai Lama. But then Hasan Khan, grandson of Gushe Khan, said, you know what, my grandfather was too generous to Tibetans, I'm going to lead my own army, slaughter aristocrats, and dethrone 6th Dalai Lama. I'm going to put my own nephew, some say his own son, as the 6th Dalai Lama. And then he writes to Qing, my son is the Dalai Lama now, 6th Dalai Lama. But I already gave one degree to the other Dalai Lama, the Tibetan one. No, my son is the Dalai Lama now. Okay, degree issued. Your son is the 6th Dalai Lama. Then the Mongols in Kokonur area, they rebelled. They said, how come, Hasan Khan, you are Mongolian? You can't do this. Dalai Lama is very sacred, very important to us. It's Tibetan, you know. And the Tibetans also revolt. And they appeal to Qing and say, you know, this guy is wrong. We got the real Dalai Lama born in Lithang. Okay, decreed, he is the 6th Dalai Lama. So we had 3 Dalai Lamas living at the same time, recognized, his degree was issued by Qing. Can you imagine? My point is, decree didn't matter. Local recognition determined the authentication of Dalai Lama, not other way around. If decree determined, then there should not be 3 Dalai Lamas, right? It's the local, this is I have the authentic one, and the decree was issued. Hasan Khan fraudulently claimed, because they wanted to control the office, it's a fraudulent, it's his son or nephew. Okay, we want the office, we don't care who the Dalai Lama is. But then the Tibetans said, no, we have the real one. Okay, degree. So when Chinese government says we have the authority, our decree is the final say, historically wrong. Now they bring a golden urn made out of gold. And so now if you put 3 names in this with ivory sticks, you stir it, whichever comes out is the authentic one. Because the reincarnation process is too complicated. Who knows who is right or wrong? There is a corruption, there's abuses, powerful families, put their candidates forward. And there were abuses in Tibet. We should accept that fact. But then we have a very democratic, transparent way of getting rid of them. We have many great lineages. Many of them ended because some way or the other, they lost their ways, there was abuse, there was corruption, and followers said, we can't accept this. It's a fraudulent way. We have our own ways. It might take years, even a generation, but we get rid of them. But Chinese government said, no. Golden urn, you shake it, stir it, ivory stick is so precious. When the name comes out, it's the authentic one. But then if you read papers and books written about golden urn, it brought more corruption. You bribe the ambans, Chinese officials, you get your candidate in the golden urn. They even select you. So it did not end corruption or abuses. So golden urn did not prevent corruption, abuses, thereby the justification is invalid or weakened. Now, golden urn itself, we must know the traditional process is, yes, there's a lot of divination, all that. Finally, Lama puts name of the candidates in a dough. They put a name in a dough, 2, 3 dough, and then in a bowl, they stir it. They're praying. And they stir it, when the name pops up, they say, okay, this is the reincarnated Lama. That's the traditional way. Most of the Lamas are selected that way. The who is responsible put names in the dough, and 3 dough, and then they stir it, name pops up, and say, okay, this is the one. Or they will try again and do it. So what golden urn did was they just changed the material from the bowl to an urn, dough with ivory stick. Now, if you change the material, can you say, I've introduced a totally new procedure. This is a new procedure, and hence, I have modernized the Tibetan selection process, and this is the legitimate one. No, they just changed the material. Changing a material does not bring new procedure or new regulations or new system. It's just a change of material. So when they show their golden urn, okay, just hope. Now, if the Chinese government use golden urn, will Tibetan follow? No, because Panchen Lama, Tashilumpo Monastery, is the base of Panchen Lama. When he died, Chinese government appointed a search committee led by Chari Rinpoche of Tashilumpo Monastery. And they did all the search committee, right? Finally, they narrowed down and say, you know what? Gendin Chöge Nyima is the Panchen Lama. Recommended by Chari Rinpoche, the name was sent to His Holiness Dalai Lama in India, and Dalai Lama also did divination and said, you know what? Yes, Gendin Chöge Nyima is the Panchen Lama. We must remember this. Chinese government appointed committee of Tashilumpo Monastery helped them select it and finalize Gendin Chöge Nyima as Panchen Lama. And then His Holiness said yes, and he made the announcement. We make a mistake by saying His Holiness Dalai Lama recognized Panchen Lama. No, he endorsed Panchen Lama. But what did Chinese government do? 2 minutes. You're being so ungenerous. Yeah. in front of Kallu Rinpoche, we are talking about compassion, kindness, You can't be so corporate and things like that, right? Now, let's have a popular vote. Should I continue? Raise your hand. So,
No.
unanimously voted.
No democracy.
So, and my point is, now Gendin Chöge Nyima is the legitimate one, right? Now the Chinese government, what he did? They kidnapped him, he disappeared. In his place, they brought Ganzen Nubu, they brought the golden urn, right? And put 3 names, and they picked Ganzen Nubu, whose parents happened to be Communist Party members, right? And he said, he is the Panchen Lama. How many Tibetans in this room will accept Ganzen Nubu as the Panchen Lama? No. We still believe Gendin Chöge Nyima, he has disappeared. We have not met him. We have not seen him for 30 years. Because for us, the person is the reincarnated Lama, not the office, right? So let me end with this. Let me end with this, right? So golden urn doesn't matter. Now finally, there's order number 7 and order number 5. My point is till 1990, there was no laws regulating reincarnation. When Panchen Lama died in 1990, when His Holiness Dalai Lama got Nobel Peace Prize in 1990, Chinese government, we need laws. And then they brought laws. So laws were brought way later. So there were no laws from 1951 till 1990, more than almost 40 years. There were no laws. So laws were brought post facto to justify their previous action. So laws, no validity. Golden urn, no validity. Degree, no validity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lobsang Sengye. I want to make sure that we have a good participation from the audience, so I would like to ask the speakers. So the next speaker is she's done, she's already identified herself, has done a huge research on the geopolitical challenges facing Tibetans from the Chinese states. She has written many papers on the topic and will present many of the challenges as well as strengths on Tibetan sides as His Holiness reaches 90th year of his life and with good health and spirit. So, without needing to name her, our speaker is already on the podium. Kate Saunders.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Can everyone hear? Yep. Great. Okay, so I'll start straight away. The Dalai Lama's 90th birthday year represents, as we've all heard today, a critical milestone for Tibet, which is connected to the survival or otherwise of Tibet and its Buddhist civilization. So I'm going to talk about how China's systematic campaign to eliminate the Dalai Lama's influence in reaction to his strength, power, and influence extends far beyond Tibet's borders. It employs what Beijing characterizes as a protracted war to control religious succession while simultaneously promoting unyielding Marxist atheism, in Xi Jinping's words. So the implications transcend Sino-Tibetan relations. The Dalai Lama's spiritual authority, as we've heard, resonates throughout the Indian and the Nepalese Himalayas, across Mongolia, across Central Asia. It extends globally to Buddhist and secular communities worldwide. And at this pivotal moment, the preservation of Tibetan Buddhist civilization represents much more than cultural survival. It embodies a vital, progressive force which is moored in an understanding of interdependence and impermanence, and it offers a vital alternative model to the multiple crises that we're facing humanity and all living species. So first off, I want to just quickly acknowledge a disturbing pattern of Tibet's erasure on the global platforms, even in contexts where its presence is undeniable. And to give a local example, the British Museum exhibition recently on ancient India living traditions contain not even the smallest reference to Tibet or the world's most famous Buddhist, the Dalai Lama. And Tibet was literally a blank space on the map accompanying the exhibition. And the Dalai Lama recently expressed sadness at the relabeling of Tibetan artifacts at the Musée Guimet in Paris as belonging to the Himalayan world. And this erasure in the scholarly and the cultural conversation, something very important for us to challenge. It's mirrored elsewhere, for instance, in influential writer William Dalrymple's recent book, The Golden Road. And it's particularly disturbing at this time, given that China is actively competing on a global stage, and with India in particular, to retell Buddhism's origin story, to create its own state-sponsored version, and to dominate Buddhist discourse. So this blind spot in global institutions mirrors and it enables China's systematic efforts to erase Tibetan identity and to intensify Tibet's assimilation, critical to Xi Jinping's strategic goals. In July, I was one of thousands of people very fortunate enough to attend His Holiness birthday celebrations in Dharamsala, and also attending were camera teams, media teams from all over the world. And it was notable that most of the international coverage, of course, focused on His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and the future of the institution, as one might expect. But it was disappointing that there was hardly any coverage of the realities inside Tibet today, which is so crucial. There are many, many reasons for this, which we can't go into here. Among them, China's expulsion of international experienced correspondents, sealing off Tibet from the outside world, and closing the gateway into exile for Tibetans. But that reality inside Tibet matters, not only to Tibetans, but to the world. Tibet has an often overlooked overlooked strategic and geopolitical significance, as Lobsang Sangila has explained just now. World's highest and largest plateau, global epicenter of climate change, the source of Asia's major rivers. China's policies are rapidly reshaping Tibet's landscape and have incalculable consequences downstream. And Beijing has a coherent plan to control Tibet, which directly impacts now, I think we can see clearly, on global systems. It involves infrastructure construction on a massive scale for dual civilian military use. It involves the removal of Tibetan rural population from their land, border village construction and resettlement, big data centers, the extraction of minerals, including important deposits of lithium, and of course the construction of hydro dams in some of the most seismically unstable areas of the planet. So here are two scenes that capture the essence of the struggle between sacred authority and state power. In Manhattan last year, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was recovering from knee surgery in a hotel room covered in scaffolding. And this unlikely place became a pilgrimage site for Tibetans from all around the world. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away in Xining, Xi Jinping visited Tibetan children at a Chinese boarding school, emphasizing the party's agenda to replace Tibetan identity with Chinese nationalism. And during his visit, Xi went to a monastery. It was the very site where his father, communist revolutionary Shi Shongshun, had met the 10th Panchen Lama in 1951. And that Panchen Lama died in 1989 after submitting one of the most far-reaching critiques of communist rule ever written. So his successor, installed by Beijing, while the Dalai Lama's choice disappeared at the age of 5 in 1995, remains central to China's plans for controlling the future succession. And this was underlined during Xi Jinping's Lhasa visit in August, which was a highly choreographed North Korean-style affair in stark contrast to the joyous outpouring of love and reverence that we experienced in Dharamsala in July. And prior to his Lhasa trip, Xi Jinping met Gyaltsen Norbu, installed by the Chinese as Panchen Lama, and instructed him to make greater contributions to the Sinicization of religion in Tibet. So earlier this month, just in the first week of October, the authorities staged another elaborate act of political theater. Eminent Tibetan lamas were brought together from across the entire Tibetan plateau to attend a Kalachakra empowerment conferred by China's Panchen, Gyaltsen Norbu, and Tibetans understand very well the deeper subtext. And various Tibetans observed to me that receiving this empowerment connotes a spiritual bond of trust between a teacher and a disciple. And in staging this ceremony with a Lama that most Tibetans do not regard as legitimate, China is aiming to create a personal religious bond as part of its elaborate plans to ensure influential religious leaders conform to their imposition of an imposter Dalai Lama when the time comes. So Tibetans consider the Dalai Lama to be a living bodhisattva of compassion, someone who's consciously chosen rebirth to help all beings. And his achievements that we're all well aware of in this room in Buddhist scholarship, in secular education, and in scientific dialogue bear this out. And of course, today the Dalai Lama's spiritual authority spans the world. He's met presidents, popes, and prime ministers right from his early meetings with Mao Zedong in the 1950s. And many Chinese in China number among his devotees, and that's a fact he specifically referenced in his July statement confirming the continuation of the Dalai Lama institution. So, and in response to this global presence on the world stage, Beijing has intensified a counter-influence operation seeking to end international support for Tibet and to prevent the emergence of a leader of any similar stature in future. Most of the people in this room are well aware of the various control mechanisms that they employ in order to do this in Tibet. Party cadres have been stationed in every village of Tibet since 2011. AI-driven surveillance systems monitoring monasteries and lay society, secular party committees embedded within monastic institutions, mandatory political education for both religious and lay people. In a new development, there's an expansion of preschool education with kindergartens for children. And the stakes became deadly real when Hunkar Dorji Rinpoche, who is a 56-year-old abbot and leading educator from Golok, disappeared from his monastery last year after refusing to host China's Panchen Lama. He managed to escape to Vietnam, but was tracked down and detained, apparently in the joint Chinese-Vietnamese security operation. China announced his death days later, just 2 weeks before Xi Jinping's visit to Hanoi, where China strengthened security cooperation with the communist government in Vietnam. And that development, I think, exemplifies how China's strategies have evolved from direct repression in Tibet to a sophisticated matrix of control extending well beyond its borders and connected to this succession issue. And that includes investment in Buddhist heritage sites like Lumbini in Nepal. It includes support for Chinese Buddhist organizations with significant Western presence, including in this country and in other European countries. It includes long-term promotion of the pro-Beijing Shugden sect, and it includes attempts to sideline the Dalai Lama's influence in India, including setting up a rival Nalanda University in China itself, which attracts Indian and Nepalese students. So in 2020, the United States adopted legislation rejecting any foreign interference in selecting the next Dalai Lama. Soon afterwards, China escalated by making it illegal for reincarnate lamas to be born outside Chinese territory, and that paved the way for heightened pressure on foreign governments to acknowledge Chinese authority over the Dalai Lama. Mongolia represents a critical test following the Dalai Lama's recognition of this child, who is Mongolian American, as the 10th reincarnation of the Bogd Lama, or the Jetsun Dampa. And that's a lineage symbolic of independent Mongolian nationhood and identity. And the Dalai Lama has played a critical role in the revitalization of Buddhism in Mongolia since the communist era, the Stalinist excesses of the 1930s. And China has responded with pressure on the family of the child, interference in monastic practice, and other Tibetan Buddhists connected to Dharamsala. So India, which is the land of the Buddha and heartland of Nalanda, stands at the epicenter of this struggle. And although the Dalai Lama has led a spiritual and a cultural revitalization of Buddhism across the Himalayas, his role of developing and protecting Buddhism in India is often sidelined and obscured. The sixth Dalai Lama was born in Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, an Indian state that China now claims as part of the PRC. And China is now expanding efforts to deepen alliances with states along the subcontinent's northern frontiers, to weaken India's broader geopolitical influence, and to build pro-China groupings of Buddhist heritage countries through trade and connectivity networks. So the soft power of the Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism, which is such an asset to India, and security imperatives are now intertwined, and that will now continue to shape and define India-China relations in future. So we don't have time to talk much about Nepal, so I'll just close off. I was going to say that although the Tibetan community in Nepal has shrunk to around 9,000, it's a very demoralized, marginalized community, Tibetan religious leaders with a strong international profile now have a powerful presence in the Kathmandu Valley, attracting people around the world, and very active in interactions between Dharamsala and Himalayan Buddhists. So just to conclude, if I may, China's success in its future attempts to influence and control the succession are not certain. Beijing has acknowledged some political vulnerabilities over its control of the plateau. Its multi-dimensional approach to controlling Tibet and the Dalai Lama's succession is countered by the global influence of the Dalai Lama and the civilizational power of Tibetan Buddhism. And this also lends the administration in exile an element of strategic leverage in its efforts to engage China. The Dalai Lama is a progressive leader who has demonstrated a capacity to evolve and to be flexible, whereas in contrast, China's fixation on an imperial golden urn ritual comes across as retrograde and old-fashioned. So, final, 1 minute. Okay, 30 seconds. So what hangs in the balance extends far beyond Tibet's future. It tests the international community's resolve to safeguard pluralism against transnational authoritarian networks whose reach increasingly transcends borders. And the Dalai Lama institution and Tibetan Buddhism represent this vital, socially progressive force. So I left a call to action here.
I think we can come back to that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. We'll come back to your concluding 1 minute, which extended to 3 minutes.
Sorry.
My next speaker is... he looks at the reincarnation and the succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama from the angle of sovereignty and self-determination for Tibetan people, and he has been very vocal on this subject for many years, in fact. So here is our Professor Divesh Anand to expand on his thinking.
Thank you so much. As I said, I'm here now not as the organizer of the conference, but as a speaker and a scholar on this subject. Let me ask, so how many of you feel that the question of reincarnation for the Dalai Lama should be decided by the Dalai Lama? Can you raise your hand, please? How many of you feel that the question of the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama should be decided by the Dalai Lama? Good, you're awake now. If you're tired, that's good to shake you. If I had said, how many of you feel that it should be decided by Chinese government, possibly no one would raise a hand, then you're still inactive, so I wanted to make you active, but that's important, right? We said it. Yet, imagine if someone says to you, your views don't matter. This is what you believe, it doesn't matter, and we will impose it upon you. That would be unfair. That would be injustice. And in particular political context, that would be erasing your right to choose, right to determine. It would be against self-determination. If imagine that you are the people whose fate is closely connected to the Dalai Lama, so you're the Tibetan people closely connected to the Lama, and you're being told your voices don't matter, your leader's choice doesn't matter, what matters is what I decide. That is colonialism. How does colonial occupation function? How does colonization function? It functions through subjugation. It functions through domestication, it functions through expulsion, and it functions through extermination. So if we take examples of the ways in which China has dealt with Tibetan population since 1959 in particular, it has included everything, right? Subjugation, domestication, expulsion, and extermination. Now, if we focus on, that's what I've looked at in my work, but if you focus even on the concept of reincarnation, a practice of reincarnation, first 30, 40 years, they didn't really care. Because they had supreme confidence. And you think, but why would Chinese government not start to control in 1959? The whole concept of reincarnation. And this reminds me of a particular, later declassified in archives, a conversation, an exchange between Khrushchev and Mao. So China, the Russian president and the Soviet Union president and Mao, where Mao was asked, why did you not kill the Dalai Lama when he was fleeing in 1959? And Mao's response was, it doesn't matter, he's unimportant. We can get 6 Dalai Lamas, we can manage them because ultimately Tibetan people would believe in what we are doing. So there was a supreme confidence in Communist Party in China about the ideology. Because in 1915, that's what it was. It's a Russian archive, not the Chinese archive, by the way, that mentioned it. The reason I highlight this, of course, is because China had supreme confidence. Communism had supreme confidence that it is the way forward. Remember, you have got the slave mode of production, primitive, slave, feudal, capitalist, and communist. There's nothing beyond communist. Communist is the end of civilization in terms of being at the superior. So the idea was once you are communist, you can't go back. So once Tibetans have been made communist, how can you go back? Because that's a superior thing, right? However, in late 1970s, when the negotiations started taking place between the Dalai Lama and Chinese government, and when the Tibetan negotiators went into Tibet, Chinese government realized that actually the Dalai Lama remains very popular. And then, of course, as other speakers have pointed out, things in 1980s that took place that shook the Chinese government, where they realized that actually reincarnation is something they have to now manage and control. So they start focusing on domestication. So order number 5, you have all heard from 3 or 4 of us by now. Now, order number 5, again, I'll not... Good thing about going okay, nice music. Anyway, the good thing about being the last is I don't have to repeat anything anyone says, or I could just repeat it. It's quite easy for me, right? And yet it's also difficult. What else do I say which they haven't said? So what I'll add to order number 5, of course, in 2007 is, basically it says that ultimate authority for any reincarnation, including your reincarnation if you were in that context, would be the government, right? But they also say it's not the Beijing. They don't say, they say basically every monastery has to write to the local Buddhist association and make a permit. So the permit for the living Buddha, that's what they call, right? The permit has to come via local Buddhist association, but in case of high lamas, like the Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, Karmapa, it has to come via China Buddhist Association. So there's a body. Now, you may think that fine, there's a China Buddhist Association, so they are the mediators between the monastery and the government, China Buddhist Association. The challenge, of course, is China Buddhist Association is not an independent organization. It's not a neutral organization. It's not a bridge between Buddhists and government. China Buddhist Association is a part of United Front Work Department. Now, United Front Work Department is essentially integral to Communist Party of China. So you can imagine, therefore, Communist Party of China has United Front Work Department. United Front Work Department, by the way, that also deals with most of the propaganda, right? United Front Work Department then controls China Buddhist Association, that in turn controls reincarnation. Therefore, the notion that somehow Chinese laws are like any other government, where you are having some kind of secular oversight over religious matters, doesn't work because there's a complete control. So essentially, the order number 5 is, in 2007, is essentially about domestication, subjugation, and where it's possible, if you don't accept, extermination in the sense of bringing disrespect to certain institutions through confusion, but of course expulsions. That's how they operate. Now, one thing to bear in mind is, and Chinese government language often would be that they are doing what other governments have done or do. They all no one lets religion be completely free. They have some kind of control. So the first country to legislate around reincarnation was not China, it was Bhutan. They did in the 1960s. It was very clear. There was a National Assembly passed a law, which was a National Assembly at that point in time, which essentially said that in 1960s, they had a phenomenon of number of Bhutanese babies being discovered as lamas of Tibetan lamas. And then, of course, apart from the wealth and the power and the prestige, that was leading to instability in Bhutan. To control that, essentially, they had a law where basically they had to get permission. And some kind of law was basically that if a Bhutanese boy, it was usually boy in that case, baby is recognized and the parents want to take them out of Bhutan, then they lose the citizenship of Bhutan. So, in one sense, it's correct that China is not unique in terms of trying to legislate or trying to control. But the difference is, the Bhutanese attempts were not to bring disrespect for the institution. It was not to domesticate the institution. It was to manage between their own national security and maintain respect for the institution. So there's no evidence at any point in any of the legislation that Bhutanese government wanted to bring disrespect. Now, if you compare that vis-a-vis China, you find that at every stage for China, it is around not generating belief, not mediating between belief, but essentially bringing the belief down. If you have 2 Dalai Lamas, 3 Dalai Lamas, 4 Dalai Lamas, where you might not even believe in like the Panchen Lama case, right? The Panchen Lama chosen by Chinese government. If no Tibetans believe, that's fine. They will be imposed. It will lead to confusion. It will lead to chaos. It might even lead to possibly, that's what possibly Communist Party might hope is, it might lead to even Tibetans losing faith in the institution. That also serves the interest, right? So the reason I wanted to highlight this part, of course, is there is Chinese colonization and attempt to control reincarnation. That's how we have to see how China operates. Second, it does raise complicated questions about national identity. I don't want to look at you, Rinpoche, because I don't know your full ethnic background, but imagine a situation. I hope you don't mind, but a different context, fine. Let's ignore him. Let's focus on someone else. Imagine that for 50 years' time, or 60 years' time, later, right? In terms of even, and it's not a joke, we know it's serious, but that's how I speak, so you have to accept it. Imagine that the 15th Dalai Lama baby is found, and I've said that, so if you've heard me, it's a repetition, but most people wouldn't have heard. Reincarnation is found in Tawang. Now, that to an extent fulfills the Dalai Lama's clear message that he's not going to reincarnate in Chinese-controlled Tibet. It's in Tawang. It's a Buddhist majority area. From Chinese government claim and Chinese map, that's actually China. So it would be quite interesting for China to make a claim that it was done in foreign land when on its own map it's China. So we'll find it how they do it, we'll see it. But imagine that that boy is actually a Bhutanese family who's living there. So the question would be, is that boy Tibetan? Is that boy Bhutanese? Is that boy Indian? The reason I raise this question is because when we look at modern international relations, it is very much based on boundaries. Here's end of China, here's where Mongolia begins, here where Mongolia ends, here where Russia begins. The national identity is either you are this or that. But entire concept and practice of reincarnation challenges them. Because you could be born in a family that's ethnically Tibetan but grown up in Nepal, then you get your entire education in India, but you are a reincarnation of someone in Bhutan, right? So I'm just giving that as an example. So who are you then? Okay, you are Rinpoche, but who are you in the sense of ethnicity? So you see, the reason I highlight this is because not only in terms of boundary and borders, but also in terms of national identity belonging, reincarnation poses very interesting and important challenges to international relations. Finally, when it comes to Tibetan reincarnation and that of the Dalai Lama, my argument would be, it is not, I know we respect him, but I would argue that it's not even the choice of the Dalai Lama. It has to be the choice of Tibetan people. Of course, in which case he represents the Tibetan people, that's there. Because the reality is, and he has himself said in his statement that when people from Tibetan regions, from Mongolia, from the Buddhist republics in Russia, from India and elsewhere, they wrote, right, that he decided, right? But to an extent you could see, because he had said he might not reincarnate. He might reincarnate something else, he might not. He kept saying he retains the sovereignty over his indecision. So ultimately, reincarnation was about sovereignty issue for him. But his sovereignty has been qualified that sovereignty is not his individual sovereignty of 14th Dalai Lama. That sovereignty is also closely connected to the wishes and determination of people of Tibetan origin and Tibetan Buddhist origin. So in one sense, the Dalai Lama himself acknowledges that the entire issue is not only about him, it is essentially about the question of Tibetan self-determination. And that is important to bear in mind, because geopolitically the way it would be played out would be where there'd be a lot of focus on the reincarnation question, there's two Dalai Lama, maybe no, whatever, that would happen. But we should constantly remind ourselves and remind others that this is about self-determination of Tibetan people. It is also not only about the past of Tibetan people, where the Dalai Lama was most important, not only the present of the Tibetan people, but also the future of the Tibetan people. And because that self-determination is important question to bear in mind, because often as scholars when we discuss, we sometimes tend to forget it. That we say, oh, we are not being political when we say it, it is a political question. Because the whole issue of the reincarnation has become so important because Tibetan people are facing erasure in their own homeland, and possibly, as Kate highlighted, in terms of how it's happening through writers and scholars and museums, even in the West, and even in India. Because in India, you have got an Indianization of Tibetan discourse, the ways in which Tibet is gradually being erased, and you're talking of Himalayan people. Himalayan people is not even Tibetan and Himalayan, actually Himalayan. So there's an erasure taking place. So I would like to conclude by reminding ourselves, and which when Martin earlier pointed out, the question of, therefore, reincarnation of the Dalai Lama for me is more than the Dalai Lama. It is about Tibetan people. I'm looking at you, but of course you were Sikyong in the past, but okay, fine. Others too, looking at you. Oh, I have to need 1 minute about that flag. It's connected to you. I'll tell you how later. Tibetan people, but it is also ultimately connected to the wider issues of who gets to decide their own fate, collective and individual. And remember when I started by saying we are hosted by the Center for the Study of Democracy, it is essentially about democratic right of a sovereign entity, institution, to determine for themselves, in collaboration with those they trust, those who have faith in them, about their own future. Therefore, reincarnation question is connected to religion, but it's essentially connected to democracy, question of rights, questions of sovereignty, and questions of self-determination. On that note, let me remind you of this flag, by the way. This is a flag, I mean, you wouldn't know how when I took it, but you were a Sikyong then. And I want to end with that. In Dharamshala. That's Dharamshala. That's around the temple of the Dalai Lama. So I was circumambulating. Now I'm saying I'm not a religious person, but I like to circumambulate there. So that's what it is, right? I did it. And I was invited by Dr. Lobsang Sangye. There was an institution he had created, which was a new one then, Tibet Policy Institute. What even they would not have realized positive Tibet policy. I was one of the first speakers there. You might know because you got me invited, but anyway, one of the first speakers. And I did a workshop on researching while being colonized. There's a 2-day workshop I did there, right? How do you research while you're colonized? That was the approach. But the reason I highlight that, of course, is because it reminds me of, I've used this picture in various places, right? It reminds me of course, Dharamshala. It reminds me of government in exile being there. It reminds me, of course, personal, but it's political. But it also reminds me of the importance of seeing the connections, right? And I forgot what I was going to say, why I highlighted, but that was the highlight part, right? And to end, again, anyway,
Center for Democracy.
It was democracy. It was the democracy part, right? So, but ultimately, our responsibility, I would say, now I remember Martin, I looked at him and I remember what I was going to say and end. That the question shouldn't be what the Dalai Lama wants, that's for him to decide, as we have said. And as non-Tibetans, and I would take the point that we should not be saying what Tibetans should want and not want, is their determination. Our role as scholars, our roles as practitioners, our roles as advocates is to completely and always insist upon not letting Tibetans be erased, and doing our level best to generate more knowledge about Tibet, which is not controlled through colonial modes of production. So that's our role, and that's what we do at Westminster, and that's what we want to do. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dibesh. So we had a really interesting a spectrum of opinions from self-determination to what is happening now and the historical narrative on the reincarnation and succession of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I hope one of the main points that I want to stop the speakers speaking less is I wanted to give the floor more so that people can participate in this. So I hope there will be many small questions, big questions. But I want to ask three of them first, whilst you're thinking, that the polarization of thinking that is our Dalai Lama and their Dalai Lama, as we speak now, as if there are two camps. Of course, there are two camps in a way. But how do you imagine that Dalai Lama being the emanation of Chenrezig, especially looking after the land of snow in Tibet, when he talks about His Holiness being born in a free country, what country or what region does our researchers associate these two? Something related to Himalayas or something down in the oceans? Or how do you see this as researchers? Can I?
No, again, it's very important. The relationship between teacher, guru, and disciples, right? So it's disciples outside mainly, So we believe that now we ask our guru to come back. Now so it's very democratic. The disciples authorizes the guru now. You have the power, our prayer appeal for you to come back. And thereby guru authorizes now, there's authorization, this is very democratic, authorizes his office, Ganden Podang, trust, I authorize you to coordinate and facilitate the selection of my Dalai Lama, my reincarnation. Contrast that with Chinese government. Everybody is saying, don't do it. We don't authorize you. We don't want anything from you, right? Yet they want to. So this authorization, now we have delegated to Ganden Podang. Now we must also believe, now there are a lot of lineages where they leave either written indications or indications in many ways or in mystical realm as well. When the search committees are formed, when they travel around to find this reincarnated Lama or the boy, in fact, in some of the Dalai Lamas, right, the key figure who actually finds the reincarnated Lama is a cook of the previous Dalai Lama. So it's not the high authority guy. It's what I call familiarity and similarity test you have to go, And then the cook and the personal attendants, those who serve the Lama, know him the best. And they will say, oh, this boy has very similar characteristic, And this boy also say, oh, I know you, or some indications, say, oh, there's this touch. That's the mystical realm. That's the emotional intelligence, That's how they connect and say, I think he's the guy. I just feel for this, And it's not the head of the group. It's the cook or the person attendant who will make the strongest recommendation, and the head search party will do it. So there is authorization, clearly, and then the search. Now, where it is for His Holiness Dalai Lama to decide, and it's consciousness to decide, right? We don't say soul. The consciousness will travel. And that, I think, His Holiness will decide where. Now, it could be, India. It could be, anywhere in the world. But most likely, in India, I would guess, Because normally, the Lamas, they leave indication. Someone mentioned third Dalai Lama. He spent many years in Mongolia. There's always a mystery. Why fourth Dalai Lama was born in Mongolia? Because he spent many years in Mongolia. He died in Mongolia. And Mongolian followers say, we want our teacher to come back. And the fourth came to Mongolia. Right? So, similarly, His Holiness Dalai Lama has lived the longest in India. And he himself says, I'm a proud son of India because the body is made up of all the dal and bhat I ate in India. And the gyan, the wisdom I have is from Nalanda, So both his brain and his body is made in India. Now he has already shown spiritually, personally, indications. But you never know. London could be also his favorite place deep in his heart. So...
Well, with all the curries and Indian food here in India, you never know, right? But that's fine. No, the one thing I would highlight, of course, is we do talk of two scenario, etc., and sometimes we do it in the game sense, how it works. But this is an important matter. Now, I would argue that if Chinese government wanted some kind of resolution in the longer term, the best thing they could do is not recognize anyone. And the reason for that, of course, is because at least that still leaves some room for negotiation 20, 30 years later. So I said, if they're sensible, if they're pragmatic, they might not recognize the boy recognized by the exiles, that's understandable, but not recognize anyone. Because if they do that, at least in 30, 40 years' time, if their situation changes, maybe there's some scope for negotiation. But if they do recognize someone inside China, Chinese-controlled Tibet, that's the end of any negotiated settlement ever in history between China and Tibet. So I would say, we don't know, because of course, all the indications of China is that it's going in more draconian authoritarian direction, so it's likely to be more arrogant and do it. But I said, if they decide not to, that might be more sensible from their perspective and also offer some solution in the long term.
Thank you.
Okay, so Tibetans are having to reimagine succession planning in an entirely new landscape where the Tibetans in exile face economic, other forms of coercion, transnational repression, digital surveillance, and they don't have access to their landscape, the Oracle Lakes, the sacred mountains and so on. So this, and at the same time, the geopolitical forces arrayed against them are something that have never been faced before in Tibet's history. So as the panel have said, this is a very serious position. And the Dalai Lama has said this is the most serious threat to the survival of Tibetan Buddhist civilization in 2,000 years of history. So, and often when I speak to, for instance, governments, or when I go and do the lobbying that Kalu Rinpoche talked about this morning, that's so important to do, often there's a sort of bit of a fixation on the whole process of reincarnation. You know, is there a child going to be born who's got bigger ears, or where will that child be found? And I always try to steer the conversation away from this to look at what can actually be done now in the global political climate to support Tibet, to prevent the erasure, and to, I think, new multilateral path strategies are required, really, in which governments see this as a much more strategic issue than they have before. No. So that the importance of Tibet, the way it matters to the world as an issue of strategic significance that matters to India in terms, and it matters to Britain as a part of the Indo-Pacific tilt, the Indo-Pacific narrative. It matters in terms of the climate change, climate emergency debate. So I think that if we can show the reincarnation issue and the future of Tibetan Buddhist civilization as an integral part of this, and what we have to defend and protect.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may quickly, if I wear my Tibetan hat, we all talk about two Dalai Lamas, right? And then there is dilemma, there is drama. For Tibetans, there is no drama. There are two Panchen Lamas. One is fake, one is real. We choose the real. Fake, we don't care. Historically, we have had some fake Lamas. Historically chosen by same monastery, same Labrang sometimes. We know how to differentiate it, right? For us, very simple. One authorized by Dalai Lama is the real one. One chosen by Dalai Lama is a fake one. So fake is fake and real is real. But then we want to create this awareness, so that people understand. Mm-hmm. But then obviously, it's geopolitics, media and all that. China will use their power. But our effort is to create awareness. But for believers, including Western Buddhists, it's pretty clear. Dalai Lama said so, he's the real one.
Mm-hmm. So, the floor is open to the... Yes, the last one there. Could you raise your hands?
Thank you so much for all the panelists. Great discussion. I just wanted to ask one question of Sisu Konloson Singela. Recently, you've been in India and on lots of speaking assignments in the media and also at various universities, and having seen all those and also understanding that you have lots of context within the Indian establishment, I was just curious to know, your sense of how the Indian friends over there, especially those with influence, look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama's reincarnation issue. If it's comfortable for you to share with us. Thank you.
Yeah, now I'm not in official position. I can share a bit. But I think you should follow. Shiv Shankar Menonji has spoken about it. Shyam Saranji, Nirupama Rao, the former Foreign Secretary of India, has written about it. And then, I invited then Shyam Saranji, former Foreign Secretary of India, came to a panel on IIC. So if you listen to them, then their indications, what they're saying is essentially, India doesn't have to do anything, right? Say this or that. But we will continue to work with Dharamsala and Gandhi and Photang. So it means the protocol of this Dalai Lama will continue with the next, and the relationship will next. In that sense, this is very Indian way of recognizing and facilitating you. So that's how they are going to do it. Having said that, now I've been pressing the government to issue a statement saying, whatever His Holiness Dalai Lama decides, also the Indian government will follow, mainly because India has 5,000 years of, Hindu civilization, you can call it, but a tradition where the kings and the emperors don't interfere in the selection of Shankaracharyas and Pandit of different temples. And they can say, 5,000 years, we don't interfere. Similarly, we will not interfere in the selection of Dalai Lama. That is our parampara, or that's our tradition, and no one should interfere. India can say that. So that's the line I'm trying to push, So, and then I think if you read the statement issued by MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, has said something like that. It's quite vague, but that's the indication. So India can do all these things without saying, but if we have someone say it, that's what we prefer. Then at least there could be change of parties, change of prime ministers, and one day they might come under Chinese pressure. And then if there are no statements, then, the action might fluctuate a bit, right? So just to prevent that, statement like that, it's possible, I think. But when I talk inside Delhi, they all are very sympathetic. They're all very interested. I've been working on this for 10 years now, creating awareness within the Indian government, outside DC, Brussels, everywhere. They all are sympathetic. They all lean towards our thinking. But official statement is one we are looking for.
Okay, next, you want to speak? Maybe we can take a couple of questions. So, is there anybody who wants to ask? Okay, and Natasha first, and then Martin. We'll take two questions at a time.
Couple of points really quickly. First, to say, yes, absolutely, that would be great, what you were just saying. And His Holiness referred to being born in a free country, and I wonder if he was referring to the Freedom Index, because currently the only country classified as free in South Asia is Bhutan. All other countries are ranked as partly free, speaking as a political scientist. But, the broader point, I think, is one about research and the significance. And I was there at the TPI as well. And also, I just wanted to say that, these questions of freedom, nationalism, all of these questions are really central to Tibetans and to such, issues and causes. So if there are people here or people who want to be more involved in, doctoral scholars, in creating venues for young Tibetans to be able to create knowledge that Tibetans can create, please do get in touch. I mean, I'm very impressed by, everything that the panel has highlighted, and it's striking how little all of these questions figure in international relations when we talk about it. And the worries in the world ahead, and this is just you may want to pick up on this or not, but the distance between DC and Delhi with the second Trump administration seems to be, changing. So perhaps opportunism and realpolitik are taking precedence over longer term, committed principles of policy. And if you wanted to reflect on what those challenges might mean specifically for Tibetans with, in the context of India versus US.
No, I just came from DC also, yeah.
Martin?
Thank you, Martin Mills again. Probably too often, I should probably keep my trap shut, but there we go. I do think, however, I'm going to put a caveat in here, which is to agree with Lobsang Sangye briefly, in the sense one does need to remember that the religious interpretation and the political interpretations are different. And with all enormous due respect to the host, and I appreciate you're largely from Politics and International Relations departments, politics and international relations is not the whole of reality. A crucial ethnographic and historical point here, of course, is that actually in the Tibetan history, various kings have interfered with the reincarnation process. So the king of Tsang, for example, in the early 1600s, banned the search for the reincarnation of what would eventually prove to be the fifth Dalai Lama, the Great Fifth. Probably with good reason, given what the Great Fifth then went on to do, but there we are. And the political process of recognition is one, even then, about handing over land and titles and monasteries and seals and all of those kinds of things, which is a sort of slightly separate process, the question of saying, well, what happens to the reincarnation? The idea that, for example, I don't think that even the Chinese Communist Party, well, maybe actually in their happiest dreams, think that they can actually determine the direction of a Nampa Shepa as it moves towards rebirth. Maybe they do, maybe some people do, and think that bureaucracy will cover that. But I do think one needs to keep that sort of, those two things separate from one another, precisely because the resilience of the Tibetan tradition is that it has survived many of these moments as a consequence of its religious devotions and so on and so forth. If we're talking interreligious dialogue here, I'm going to take a page from the Jewish Talmud, which talks about what are called the tzaddikim nistarad, which are the 36 hidden figures that maintain the order of the world. And they are 36 virtuous people, none of whom know that they are those people. They are not recognized as such, they are not given titles, they are not given offices, but they keep the order of the world going because of their simple virtue, which is entirely hidden. And I sort of think, in a long-term historical perspective, rather than simply the short-term political perspective, we do need to kind of keep those two separate.
Thank you, Martin. Do you want to say something? No?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a short one. Anybody
Maybe a
prepare
short.
your questions.
A short response. I think that the Communist Party is appropriating religion or the sort of Dalai Lama institution in the same way as it does, democracy. It's not a word with meaning. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think the elaborate and the absurd nature of the Chinese planning for the succession process over decades, which we've tracked in great detail in Chinese policy documents, is a reflection of the strength and of the Dalai Lama institution, the Tibetan Buddhist civilization, but and also the discombobulation of the Chinese, because the Dalai Lama himself has maintained a position of strategic ambiguity is the way that, he's said so many things over the years, I might be reborn as a woman, or I might not be reborn at all. And of course the Chinese have reacted in the only way they know how to react, by just asserting their control over this. So, but they are still vulnerable, I think, in this respect.
And quickly, I think because Lobsang is going to respond to the Delhi DC thing, but and I'll come to the knowledge production part later in my closing remarks. But coming back to what Martin said, you're right. Politics and IR is not destiny. There are, of course, all kinds of complications. If you look at Tibetan history, even the reincarnation is longer than the history of people's relations with China. Even Dalai Lama is older than PRC. And the whole lineage is longer than 3 empires put together, including the Communist Empire. However, I would still remind ourselves that we are dealing at this present with, and this is to do with modernity, but also communism, and also the ways in which they have operated closely together. We are dealing with an ideology which becomes even stronger. So the idea of empire where you compromise, that we compromise 50-50, that's gradually gone. So the more Chinese occupation is controlled, it is becoming exterminationist in terms of absolute control over Tibetan culture and heritage. So the difference from the past would be that there is no evidence in the last 30 years that there's any room for compromise from the Chinese perspective, or there's any question or determination. Going back to the Qing Empire, even the Mongols, when they did engage or interfere, remember in the decree example, which Dr. Sangye was pointing out again and again, that they would just come up with decree, it didn't really matter, but they did come up with decree. The problem, of course, is the decree has force of violence, immense violence today, the way you can't compare with the past. The decree also has a force of preventing any other country from acknowledging anything else. That's what they're trying. So in one sense, the modern notions of sovereignty, the heavily bureaucratized surveillance state which has absolute and can have absolute control over population, which was not possible in the past, and of course the ideology, which is a mix of both capitalism and communism for China, all of that does imply that, I'm not saying that Tibetan culture will not survive with this, but it faces a pressure which they have never faced in the past.
I think we have to make the argument, it's very simple. It is for Dalai Lamas to choose. Is this body, is this consciousness, you know? So I think we should constantly remember, you know, we must articulate this. No one should interfere, not Indian government, not American government, not Tibetan government, not Chinese government, not even his family members. It's his choice. That's reincarnation. And that we must put forth. And then Natasha mentioned about Delhi and DC. Actually, in 2020, we passed a law called Tibetan Policy and Support Act. And the main chapter is on reincarnation. And that chapter says that it is for Dalai Lama and his followers to decide on his reincarnation. No one should interfere. Specifically, it says Chinese government should not interfere. Any official who interferes will be penalized or sanctioned. So America has taken a stand. Now that law was signed by President Trump. So in that sense, America is the strongest voice on this issue so far. But I know Brussels and Delhi, they all actually agree on this and how you articulate it outside. Now, another also you encourage some Tibetans, those who want to do PhD or write a paper, you should come to you. But it's very important, we must understand Chinese perspective and Chinese argument. That's why I talked about golden urn, the decree, because unless you understand China, you will not understand Tibet. So for us to understand, because they will come with Chinese argument. For example, I'll just come with Chenglong Emperor, right? Now, 1793 decree or the 29 provisions came during Chenglong. We all know that. But we should know who was Chenglong. In his tomb, even today, there is tomb. It has 30,000 Tibetan and Sanskrit characters, Buddhist characters. Not even a single word of Chinese or Manchu word. Can you imagine he was a Manchu? Why? Because he believed himself as a Buddhist, which is a good thing. But it got to his head, he himself thought he was a Buddha. Not just Buddha, he himself thought he was the greatest of all Buddhas, and he mandated a scroll with 108 Buddhas with his photo in the middle. And he mandated that when you select the Dalai Lama and Panchen Dalai Lama, you should do in front of my scroll. So I'm the greatest Buddhas, all other reincarnated Lamas should do it. And even the Chinese got rid of it. Oh, this is too much, See? So you must understand the personality background as to why this came about. He just got a little hallucination, or so to speak, So this is very important. And then Tibetans, as I said, right, already selected their lamas, and they informed the Qing, whoever, in Beijing or Mongolia, whoever wanted, and then the decree was secondary. Right? So now with the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th Dalai Lama, now 1793, the first Dalai Lama to be used, golden urn, will be 1809, right? Now, we already selected our Dalai Lamas, okay? But then Chinese government, the Qing said, you have to use the golden urn. We kind of used in one or two, but Chinese claim all. But let's assume we use for 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th Dalai Lamas. All died young. So golden urn is bad luck. So had they left us on our own device, on our own tradition, all the Dalai Lamas lived long, except one born in Mongolia, but he lived up to 24 years, right? But otherwise, 9, 10, 11, 16 years old, 14 years old, 18 years old, all died young. So when the Chinese government uses golden urn, it will bring bad luck, unfortunately, to that Tibetan boy. And they will put this boy and the Tibetan family through hell, because no one will recognize this boy. They will be socially ostracized. Because the Chinese government is so interested in controlling the office, they will put this boy and the family through hell. And then, we feel bad for the boy. But he will still be a puppet. He will still be a duplicate.
Other questions? After you.
Just quickly, I wanted to just add a very playful comment that, of course, in a room full of academics where we're talking about geopolitics, that, of course, that suggestion that the lady at the end mentioned, that, of course, it could be a girl. Just to remind us all of the possibilities and the worldwide love for the Dalai Lama. It could be anywhere on this planet at all.
Well, also because the Dalai Lama has been such a feminist leader.
Kate, I'll take another question.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. We know that.
That's all.
Whenever the fake Dalai Lama comes, we will know. We will not recognize it. Put it as simple as that. When Panchen Lama, when he was about 6, he disappeared, and a new one came from China. Nobody recognized it. So that should be clear to everybody, and should be made. We don't want to have endless debates. When the fake comes, fake must remain fake. And we, the 6 million, 12 million, 100 million, will make the determination, right? So, what I'm more interested in, not so much of the reincarnation, but survival of Tibetan as a nation and a people. What about that? Now, more of the Tibetan people, international people, should recognize Tibet as a nation. Tibet was a nation for many thousands of years. And our politicians, our lots of little offices elsewhere, why can't they open their little mouths a little bit more about the freedom of Tibetan independence? Because it was an independent nation until 1950. And that's what I'm interested in.
Now, let me wear other hat. It's easy to say fake will be fake, original will be original, we will do it. Right here in London, the Foreign Office historically used to recognize Tibetans had suzerainty in Tibet. And they changed it because people in London, Tibetans included, didn't raise their voice enough, didn't protest enough, didn't create awareness enough, did not put pressure enough on the UK government to retain that, right? Similarly, the museum in France is saying it's not Tibet Museum, it's Xizang Museum, right in front of eyes, right? What did the Tibetans in France do? They had protest, and they changed it back to Tibet. And now there's a case going on. So unless you create awareness, unless you debate, unless you go out in the streets and do it, you just can't say, when it comes, I will see. Now, Panchen Lama, Chinese Panchen Lama, was almost landed in Kathmandu, almost landed in Bangkok, because we made noise, CT included, Office of Tibetan, people made noise. They were prevented. So the fake Panchen Lama almost became a real Panchen Lama in Nepal. Okay? So we have to create awareness, debate, know, arm ourselves with facts and figures. And then the Lama is associated with Tibetan nation. He reflects and represents Tibetan nation. He has spent his whole life. He's 90 years old. From the age of 16 when he was enthroned, all he did was spoke for Tibet and Tibetan people. Why Tibetan people with only 200,000 population is one of the highest profile issues in the world because of his holiness, the Lama. We should remember that. Not even a single layperson can claim that. No one can claim that. So there's a preserving him. Now we have him as a symbol, as a nation. To lose him is to lose a symbol. Chinese government has managed to erase Tibet from the map of the world. they want to erase the term Tibet. We are close to that. Now they want to erase the Dalai Lama also. That's why I brought about Russia's dependency on China. They are already bringing. Not even few monks are able to travel to Russia. Why? Because Chinese is putting pressure. So to counter that, we need to arm ourselves. We need to be informed. And unless you are informed, just by having slogans is not enough.
Maybe a couple of questions, if there is anybody. Otherwise, we will conclude this. You have a question?
No.
No. Okay.
I'll just respond then. I was going to respond to that question. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I thought if there's more question, maybe. In terms of, you're right. This is what my presentation was. Yes, about Dalai Lama. It was also about the Tibetan as a nation or Tibetans people. That is important. But as Dr. Sangay reminded us that it's not enough for us to know what is fake, what's real, because fake can then become real, real can become fake, and that's how complicated things are. People will start saying, well, who are we to decide who's real, who's not real, and then say, because remember, the fake one has immense wealth and power of a state behind the person, right, and the institution. They're doing everything possible. So like, for instance, they say, well, you can't recognize Taiwan. You can see what is happening, right? Taiwan, from being Republic of China, becomes a de facto country, but not de jure country for most, means at least it exists in reality, to a situation where everyone knew that US will protect it, to now almost a situation where, are you sure that Trump is going to intervene to protect Taiwan? So we have shifted very rapidly. And today, 25th of October, China has declared that it's going to be Taiwan reintegration day for them, and they're going to celebrate it every year. So we know situation can change geopolitically. So going back to even the issue of the Dalai Lama and everything, what the whole conference, of course, has done is we have reminded ourselves, for us, but our duty outside this room to keep talking of this, making sure that whose decision it ought to be, and the decision is not only about the Dalai Lama and the legacy and the reincarnation part, but also in some of our cases we have highlighted the importance of speaking about Tibet externally.
So, before we conclude, I just want to ask each panel maybe one sentence each for our audience to take from what we have discussed. And it has been thoroughly enriching, thoroughly fresh and new information. So I would like you to say maybe just a word, a sentence, so that they can take home and get their teeth in and start working. Who wants to go?
Ladies first.
Ladies first, that's easy.
Yeah. Thanks, Lobsang. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say that the Tibetans often, perhaps, and maybe the activist movement, portray Tibetans as victims of oppression and abuse, which, of course, that is true, and they face tremendous oppression and abuse. But the civilization, the culture, the wisdom tradition is actually incredibly strong. And as we've seen throughout this whole day, it's an issue not only of international concern, but the Dalai Lama has globalized the institution. And if I may just add a few words, the images of Modi, Xi, and Putin holding hands together were very symbolic recently and very chilling of the new world order in which we find ourselves, in which I think we need to develop a new form of multilateral engagement to support this great civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'll go next.
Yeah.
The main impetus behind me for the work I do is essentially around emphasizing that the Tibetans have right to decide for themselves what kind of freedom do they want. Do they want freedom within China through middle way, which is the Dalai Lama's way? Do they want freedom from China? That's not for us from outside to say, but essentially as a scholar, for me, the key emphasis is on recognizing and supporting Tibetans as having the agency to speak of free Tibet.
This issue of reincarnation is also connected to global world order and especially Chinese world order. What is Chinese world order? We all must know. Huh? We might not like the present world order. It has hypocrisy, double standard, all that. But the Chinese world order can make recently 9 generals disappear. No one can ask a question. Their foreign minister can disappear. No one can ask a question. Okay? Another minister disappears, defense minister disappears. No one can ask a question. You ask, you go to jail. That's Chinese world order. Right? Today we can talk. We can criticize UK government, US government, anyone we want. We all go home, we'll have a dinner, we all go home. In China, you can't do that. So that's Chinese world order. Now, in that context, they're saying, we will select Dalai Lama. Tibetans don't want us to do it, Buddhists don't want us to do it, but we are going to do it anyway. Why? This is Chinese world order. Now, you might wonder, okay, Dalai Lama is Buddhism. No. In Xinjiang and all the Muslim area, they say, we are selecting all the imams we like. We are discrediting and dissatisfying and jailing all the imams we don't like, right? And then now with Christians also, Vatican has signed a document saying, now bishops are selected by the Communist Party of China and certified by Vatican. And they are the authentic bishops, and the patriotic bishops, popular bishops are not the ones. So when you say now, they're saying, we'll select Lama, they're already selecting bishops, they're already selecting imams, and this is Chinese world order. They want to export this around the world. Now you might wonder, is this really relevant? It is. Let's say the Bishop of Canterbury here want to visit China. If he is critical of Beijing, visa will be denied. If you praise Beijing, you will be. Now, you might wonder, what about the Pope? It's true, because there is genocide committed in Xinjiang. The UN High Commissioner wrote a report about it. When they tabled it to the United Nations, what happened? 150 countries voted against it, including many of the Arab countries. So that means 150 countries support China. Now, in these 150 countries, all the cardinals, majority, are in these countries. Now, if they want to select the Pope, they will say, hey, if we want to increase, followers in China, or if Pope wants to visit China, we must select Pope that is amenable to China. See, so this is the Chinese world order, and it's coming. Tentacles are already in Europe and everywhere. So this is what we should be aware of. That's what I want to end with. And then you want us to end with one word. I'll say, Pögyalo.